Welcome to the new episode of Dr. Piasecka's Dangerous Topics. Today we're going to be talking about hacking of the modern democracy. We will be using the example of Cambridge Analytica scandal. We will be using the example of influencing the decision-making processes in modern political settings. We have already established that information is not only the most important strategic asset, both for states, members of the private sector, so national and international companies, but also from the point of view of us, individuals that function in modern democratic societies. It is and can be used as a weapon just because of that, because in the modern conflict that quite often takes place in the information environment, information can be used both as the target of operations and as the tool of realizing those operations. It is the weapon that can influence the modern battleground. It is the weapon that can influence the modern elections and also other voting situations, such as, for example, referenda. Why are we talking about that? Well, mainly because of the fact that the tools and the mechanisms that we will be talking about today were used exactly in that manner. So, to influence quite a few electoral processes and other voting processes. The Brexit, the Catalonia autonomy referendum, the 2016 US presidential elections. These are but the few examples of the voting processes taking place in the most developed countries in the world that have been influenced with the use of information weapons and with the use of mostly information gathered about the voting citizens on social media and with the use of other places and other spaces in which we leave so-called digital footprint. The use of new technologies modifies the modern democratic process. And here we're going to learn just a little bit about how and why it happens. The beginning of our history takes place in 2010. 2010 was the year in which Facebook opened so-called API, the API platform for the developers of applications that can be accessed and used via Facebook platform. This step, it was quite a milestone in not only the ways in which we can use Facebook, but also in how the information environment changed when it comes to gathering information about us. It was not only Facebook anymore, but also the developers of individual applications that suddenly gained access to quite a few pieces of information about each and every user of Facebook that decided to use also those applications. Admit it, it was more than once probably that you have decided to check who are your ancestors or what kind of breed you are or what nationality you would be if you weren't from where you actually are. We take part in those quizzes and while agreeing to the regulations and the basic terms of services that are necessary to accept in order to access those quizzes, we agree to provide the creators of such applications with our data. Right now, the interface of the platform that Facebook is informs us quite clearly about what kinds of information, what pieces of information are actually transferred to the operator of the application. It was not always so. In the beginning of 2010s, the discussions between Facebook and Federal Trade Commission about the so-called informed consent to providing the developer with our data were quite extensive. It was quite a problematic issue, this informed consent, mainly because of the fact that the length and the level of complexity of those terms of service and regulations was complex enough that it was very difficult for the individual user to really understand what they are actually agreeing to. This is why the creator of one of those apps that was called This Is Your Digital Life, Professor Alexander Kogan, could have gathered lots and lots of data about the users of Facebook who agreed to take part in This Is Your Digital Life quiz, because this agreement that was given back then was the agreement for the creator of the application to access not only the data on the user, but also other nodes of the network that the users were connected with, which means that you agreed not only for the Alexander Kogan or the more or less anonymous creator of almost any application on Facebook to access your data, but also data of your Facebook friends. All of those events led to the set of circumstances that took place more or less between 2016 and 2018. In 2016, we have learned about the power of psychographics. This term, this phrase, power of psychographics, was used by Alexander Nix, the CEO of Cambridge Analytica, one of the main heroes of our story, or maybe anti-heroes of our story. During the Concordia Summit in 2016, Alexander Nix was giving a speech about the power of psychographics, describing how Cambridge Analytica used the modern technologies of profiling the personalities of the users of social media in order to support first the campaign of Ted Cruz during the primaries in 2016 presidential elections in the US, and then in order to support also the campaign of President Trump. The 2018 milestone was a little bit different. It was a moment in which we have learned about this power of psychographics as the whole nations, as the international community, mainly because of the fact that it blew up in the information environment globally due to the actions undertaken by one Christopher Wiley, so the whistleblower from Facebook, who contacted both New York Times and The Guardian in order to describe a story of the abuse of information by Facebook. By the way, if you are not a fan of conspiracy theories and wouldn't want to believe one whistleblower, the proof of the truth of his words might be partially assessed from the fact that within 24 hours he was suspended from Facebook. 24 hours since the publication of those reports by both The Guardian and New York Times. And so, what's quite interesting is what actually happened between Facebook, Cambridge Analytica, and the users of modern social media. The beginning of the story, the beginning of this very complicated and intricate narrative about what actually happened between modern societies, Cambridge Analytica and Facebook, takes place in the research that was carried out in the Cambridge University. They have found, the scientists working there, they have found a way to connect something that's called the Big Five, so the 5 characteristics of human personality that allow us to inform the researchers about the most important parts of our personality, those parts of our personality that actually drive our behavior, with the digital trace, the digital footprint that will live in cyberspace while using the social media, while using other websites, while generally undertaking activities in the cyberspace. So this data that was being gathered from the digital print, it was combined with the data collected by the already mentioned Professor Kagan during his quiz, This Is Your Digital Life. So we had 2 sets of data. One set of data was the set of data regarding the digital footprint of the selected group of people. The other set of data was the set of data about their personalities, their everyday behaviors, the way in which they make decisions about their everyday life, about their political choices, about generally the way in which they function. And so, via the implementation and the use of machine learning, the scientists were able to create sort of a reverse engineering way of creating personality profiles by teaching the machine which parts of the digital footprint are connected with particular characteristics of our personality. They have created a situation in which, by just having the part of digital footprint, we could prognose the personality of the person that left said digital footprint. That meant that only by gathering the data about our activities in cyberspace, by only gathering data about our likes and dislikes on social media websites and other websites, by gathering data on how much time we spend looking at articles and looking at information and videos on the web, we were able to sort of divine the way in which our personality works. And so this allowed to create the machine that, with the use of digital footprint, could describe our personality via the following 5 most important characteristics. The first one is openness. And please do note that while it seems a wild assumption that such a complicated entity as a human being might be described only with the use of 5 characteristics, one might need to remember that, first of all, those 5 characteristics, they exist on a sort of spectrum. At the very beginning of the spectrum, for example, there is openness to new experiences and new knowledge. On the other end of the spectrum, there is a cautiousness, unwillingness to experience new things. And it is rather granular than linear. This set of characteristics, the intensities of this characteristic that functions in each and every human personality. And so if you add the 4 others, conscientiousness versus carelessness, being an extrovert versus being an introvert, being an agreeable person versus being somebody quite judgmental and skeptical, and finally, neuroticism versus being psychologically resilient and confident, you might understand that the number of combinations of those characteristics is immense, and that they describe quite well the way in which we think about the world, and thus the way in which we will react to the events, happenings, and phenomena in the world around us. They will influence those sets of characteristics in various intensities. They will influence the way in which we will be making decisions about our political or social choices. And I will tell you why it is so important. Well, it is important mainly because of the fact that it allows for something that's called micro-targeting. It's called micro-targeting because this is exactly what's happening. We are recipients of information, of any sort of process that is supposed to let us know about things or convince us to do things or to stop us from doing things, that will be devised especially for us, that will be worded in a way that's most credible to us, that will stress and underline the characteristics and the sets of circumstances that are most understandable or most acceptable from our point of view. The Concordia Summit of 2016, with the speech of Alexander Nix, was actually a great way to learn about those things. One of the things Alexander Nix has said during his speech was the fact that the amount of information that Cambridge Analytica gathered about the voters in the US allowed for the creation of situation in which two people living in the same household could receive two pieces of direct mail regarding the exact same issue of political or social nature that would inform them in various manners about what the candidate or what the political party would want them to do, how the political candidate would want them to vote. The different approaches to lobbying for various issues, this is an example that could be probably most understandable and could best illustrate how important it is from the point of view of organizing modern political and social campaigns. Imagine a situation in which somebody tries to convince you that the access to guns, the universal access to firearms, is something that's important from the point of view of social cohesion or safety or integrity of your social group. Imagine it happens in the US. It's quite easy to understand that you will be using a completely different set of arguments when talking, for example, to the slightly neurotic, eco-friendly, soy latte drinking inhabitant of the New York, of the New York City, who does believe in pacifism and who does believe in peaceful coexistence, not only between individuals but also social groups and states. You will use probably also different set of arguments when talking to a southerner in the United States, the inhabitant of the most traditional US states in which the access to guns is part of the tradition, is part of the social norms, part of the set of behaviors that define being a southerner and define being a member of those slightly more traditional, slightly more conservative communities. And so, to the neurotic New Yorker, you won't be talking about tradition or something that has always been present in the realities of their hometown or their families. You will, however, be probably quite successful if you tell this New Yorker that the average time that it takes a robber to rob somebody in the streets of New York is around 4 minutes. The average time of the arrival of the police patrol is around 12 to 15 minutes. And so the difference between getting robbed and not getting robbed might be actually having a gun in their purse or in the pocket of their pants. This set of arguments will be completely ineffective when it comes to the traditional southerner that we have already described. But to them, you will probably say something as follows: it has always been so. Your great-grandfather taught your grandfather how to shoot, your grandfather taught your father how to shoot, your father taught you, and you will want to teach your son. It's about who we are, it's about our ability to defend ourselves, it's about our identity as it always has been described and construed. And so it is much easier to understand that when somebody really understands what drives us, when somebody really understands what drives our behaviors, they are able to create an information. They're quite ready to talk to us in a language that will be most convincing to us, because they will be talking about the things in which we already believe. They will be creating a situation in which there is commonality of goal and commonality of narratives between, say, candidate, political party, and us. And so this last part is actually quite important, mainly because of the fact that we're talking about strengthening the already existing beliefs. We're talking about speaking to the people who are already convinced and convincing them even more that what they believe in is right, and that the candidate or the political party is actually with them regarding said subject, that the way of thinking is the same, that their goals are the same. This all leads to less of a building bridges between conflicting or competing groups in the society, more to the radicalization of those groups. And do note how it changes the political realities in our countries. For decades, one was winning the elections not by talking to their own electoral base. We were winning elections by talking to the undecideds. We were talking to the people who are in the center of political stage. Because everybody knew who their voters were. What was the unknown was this number of people who have not yet decided. And so the political narrative, the program, was rather centered so that we could have a chance to convince the people with no radical views of the political scene. And so from building bridges and looking at the center of the political stage, we are sliding towards the end of the spectrum that is much more radical. The other problem is that because we are talking about forming a characteristic narratives, the ones that will be able to sort of shoot through the omnipresent white noise of information that surround us, we are talking also about the change in the way in which we choose our candidates. The more clickable the candidate, the more characteristic they are, the bigger their chances of getting through to the awareness and minds of the voters. The fourth problem that we might want to point is the fact that we keep coming back to the Cambridge Analytica, but it's not about Cambridge Analytica per se. It's about the fact that there are private companies to whom we outsource the electoral process. Less and less winning of the election is the issue that's concentrated or that's focused on the dialogue between the politician or the political party and their voters. It's sort of sales process that is given over to the marketing and PR companies that are producing a candidate and producing a program that they are selling to us, which means that democracy, instead of being a dialogue between the society, the citizens, the nation, and the politicians, becomes a supermarket filled with the candidates that have been prepared and packaged by the private company. And so, do we really want to live in a world in which one can outsource political victory? Are our democracies for sale? And what does it say about the future of the liberal democracies as the major and most credible way of organizing our political lives? See you in the next episodes describing the realities, threats and chances in international environment. So many questions, so few answers. The modern international relations are getting more and more complicated, not only because they are globalized, because there are so many interdependencies between the states, but also because there are so many new actors that are present in international relations. And we are not talking here only about international organizations. Global corporations, quite often with a budget bigger than quite a few states. Individuals, superpowered individuals as they're called by Frank G. Hoffman, people with access to high technologies that can influence the functioning of the critical infrastructure of the whole state. We are going on a journey to try to ask questions and maybe also find answers about the nature of modern international relations, about the intricacies of relations between states and their citizens, global corporations and their clients. Come with me and try to explore with me the very nature of international relations that do influence the way in which function our countries and the way in which we as societies and individuals function with them. My name is Paulina Piasecka, and this is my channel Dangerous Topics according to Dr. Piasecka. Please subscribe, turn on the notifications, but first and foremost, talk to me. Talk to me about the subjects that are important from your point of view that you would like to see discussed in this channel. Welcome to my world.